Greetings and salutations, this is Frederick John. In this video we're going to be creating a Rails 5 application with MongoDB as the database. We're going to be styling our application using the Semantic UI framework, and we're going to be using Sass as opposed to plain CSS. Rails will compile our Sass down for us. We won't have to do anything. Rails makes it very simple. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll create a new Rails application. Let's check that we have Ruby installed. Ruby 2.4, and let's check that we have Rails installed. We could do Rails version 5.0.2. Now the first thing that we'll do is Rails new creates a new application followed by the name of our app. Let's call it crowdfund. We're going to have to add an option here to skip active record. We'll do skip active record. So the first command you type is Rails followed by new, the name of your application, and then the option skip active record. So all we have to do then is cd into our new application, and we can open it up using our favorite text editor. I'm going to choose Sublime, and there we have it. Our new application is right here, crowdfund. Here's all of our folders and all of the configuration files here, our gem file. We can click on this. All of these gems come with the initial Rails new setup. So let's dive into the application and learn what everything is. What do we get when we run Rails new? Let's take a look at that now. If you've not developed with Rails before, it could be a little bit overwhelming. It looks like there's a lot of files and folders that have been installed for us. Let's go over the important ones right now. The folder that you're going to be using most often and you'll be most familiar with is the app folder here. This is going to contain your entire application. Okay, so everything that you're going to be doing is mostly going to be within this folder. Now, let's talk about all of the other folders that you have. Bin, you won't really need to worry about as you're developing your application. That'll pretty much be untouched. Config, these are your configuration files. So the files that have to do with when Rails initializes, the global application files and settings, the routes file, a secrets file for storing variables or API keys or passwords and things of that nature. You'll be working in and out of the configuration file, so you'll be familiar with it. DB, database. This is where your database files, folders would be located if you're doing migrations and things of that nature. We're using Mongoid. We're not really going to be too worried about this right now. Again, lib, we're not going to be worried about right now. Log, application log files, public. And this is your public folder, so things like the favicon will go here, or your error pages. So let's not worry about that for right now. Test are for your test units. Test-driven development is a developing style where you write tests and then you write the code. Tests are important in development. A temporary folder, and then your vendor files here, vendor third-party assets. Git ignore, the files that you want GitHub to ignore, the files that you don't want to check in to version control. This is a config, RU file, gem file, a list of all your gems, gem file lock, don't touch that file, and rake file, a readme in Markdown. As a new developer, what you need to concern yourself with is the app folder, the config folder, and the gem file. This is where you're going to be spending most of your time. If you don't know what gems are, they are plugins for your application. If you're familiar with WordPress, WordPress has plugins. It's a third-party bit of functionality that you can install. For example, the uglifier will compress JavaScript assets. The Sass Rails allows us to write Sass and it automatically compiles to CSS. So we're putting these gems in our application, or these gems came with it automatically, and it allows us to take advantage of that functionality. So you're going to find gems that have been written by the Rails community, and you're going to want to use those gems because they make your life much, much easier as a developer. And now you have gems such as Devise, which are phenomenal gems that have been worked and reworked many times. It's had many different collaborators improve upon it and look over it. And if you need an authorization in your application, if you need that functionality, Devise is an excellent gem to use. And you can customize it to make it more specific for your application. But essentially, it's a great way to have an authorization in your application so that you don't have to write the authorization from scratch. So like I said, you're going to be working a lot in the app folder, and in the app folder we have assets. I'm sure you can guess what goes there. This is all of your Rails assets. Rails uses the asset pipeline. So what that is it's essentially conventions that you should follow. You should put your style sheets in this folder, your JavaScript sheets in this folder, your images in this folder. And the asset pipeline will basically take care of the rest. It's that simple. For your style sheets, we'll be using SCSS. So we'll need to change our style sheet to application.scss. And that doesn't have any negative effect. We're not going to use the require statements like for CSS. We're going to be using the import statements for our application. This will be our application manifest sheet, our style manifest sheet. Everything's going to be imported into here. Rails works on the MVC architecture. That's the model, view, and controller. So you see you have a folder for your models, a folder for your controllers. Application controller is like your global controller. And you have your views right here. You have a layouts folder with application HTML ERB. This is going to be your main layout. You can see here it has a body with a yield. The yield is whatever is going to be put in there from the view. So if you make a view, you type some code in there, some HTML, and this is where it's going to go, right in the body. Some helper files you might be using, they're in here. Channels you can ignore for right now. Jobs, processes that you want to run in the background. Mailers, sending email to users. So we've gone over the application structure. Now let's continue with our Rails Mongo application. The first thing we'll need to do is set up our database. So to do that, we're going to go to mongoid.org. That's going to take us to the MongoDB documentation where we can install Mongoid, which is going to be our driver that we're using for having our Rails application talk to the MongoDB database. So you can see the current version is 6.1. We're going to go to installation and gem install Mongoid. We're going to copy, you can either run gem install Mongoid, or we're going to copy Mongoid 6.1.0 right into our gem file. So we select it, copy gem file. What I like to do is create a comment, write something like added application gems, just so I can keep track of what I've added. And we're going to save it. Now after you save that, you're going to go to your terminal, your command prompt, and within the root of your application, you're going to type bundle. Okay. Now after it's finished with that, we need to create a config file. Rails will do this automatically for us. We just need to tell it to generate one. So from the terminal, once again, Rails G mongoid :config. The G stands for generate. So that creates our config file in config and then mongoid YML. So what we're going to do is take a look at that. You'll see it's very well documented with notes for everything that you can need to customize. Now, one thing that often poses a problem later down the road is a mongoid specific option, raise an error when performing a find and the document is not found. So we're looking in our database for a document and the document is not found. We don't want it to return true. The default is to return true. We want it to return nil, so that way we know that that document isn't there. So we're going to replace true with false and save. This will return nil instead of an error. So this way when there's documents not found, we'll know that there's nothing there rather than that there's a database error. Let's get the Semantic UI gem. Put it in our gem file. Save, and then once again we're going to run bundle from the command line. And now we have those two gems installed. The documentation for the semantic gem is very comprehensive. It includes everything that you'll need to get it working. So essentially what we do then is go to our asset style sheet application, and remember how I said this would be like a manifest file. This is where we're going to be importing everything. So we'll import Semantic UI for our CSS, and then for our JavaScript we'll go ahead and require Semantic UI in our JavaScript manifest file, which is here. Now we're going to want to require that after jQuery. Since there are some dependencies on jQuery, we want to make sure that jQuery is loaded in, and then we can require Semantic UI. That's going to include the entire library, and they let you know, of course, you don't have to do that. You can require semantic modal or dropdown, but since we're going to be working with the library in full, we need all of the components. So we're going to require Semantic UI, import Semantic UI there, and now we're going to be set up to work with Semantic in our project. In your Rails project, you might want to use some different fonts, so you can go to fonts.google.com, look at the different fonts that they have. You could use Open Sans, Roboto, Lotto, those are all popular ones. You could select the fonts that you want to use, and you can use them by putting them in your application manifest SCSS sheet. You could also look at different colors if you wanted to find some different color palettes. A site like coolers.co got some cool colors that you can generate a nice palette and use that on your site. Makes it pretty easy to generate some pretty nice looking color palettes, and you can again put those right in your application manifest file. Let's take a look at how we do that. So in our application SCSS, before we import the Semantic UI library, we're going to paste in the font URL from Google Fonts. What I did was I selected 4 different fonts: Dancing Script, Laura, Railway, and Sinista. Sinista and Railway are sans serif. I like to use sans serif fonts. I think they have a nice modern look. I brought in a cursive font just in case I wanted to use a cursive, and then a serif font I brought in as well, Laura. I like to use that one as well, and that goes at the top of your sheet. This is going to bring in all of the fonts that I just mentioned, and then we're going to import Semantic UI after these fonts. Now, of course, you don't need these comments here, but I like to use them in case I'm writing some CSS. That way I can remember to put in sans serif after railway and serif after Laura. The reason that you'd want to do that is because, let's say you're writing some CSS and you want to do on the body tag, you want to put in something like a font family of Laura, and you want to remember to put serif after that. The reason being, if the user's browser doesn't support, for whatever reason, that font, or can't find it, or there's a problem loading it, that way it has a default font to fall back on. You could specify the default font. I just specify the font type, so that way I know a serif font will be loaded. So I include these as comments, so that way I can remember what fonts I can use. That way I can remember what fonts I have access to. After I put that in the application CSS, we'll save it, and then we'll create another file in our style sheets folder. We're going to call that underscore variables .scss. Now, the reason we want to use the underscore is because this is going to be a partial, and partials start with underscores. If we didn't use an underscore, then when we run our application in production, Asset Pipeline is going to produce two different CSS files. It's going to produce a application CSS and a variables CSS. But since we're using one manifest sheet, we can use underscores for our other files and use those as partials that get imported into the application CSS. And that way, when everything compiles, we'll have one application CSS, so the browser only has to grab one file, and it's going to be much, much faster that way. So within our variables, I'll paste in here a couple different colors. I like to name the color so that I know what it is. I have white, a light blue, a tan, and a deep purple. And I'm going to save that file, and then in here you can see on the site here, this is the 4 different colors. If you wanted to change the shade of a color, you can select an alternate shade. If you wanted to change it to a new color, you could select a new color. If you wanted to lock or unlock colors and get a random palette, you have a lot of different options, but the video isn't about this site. This is not a plug. This is just a site that I use sometimes. So going back to the application here, once we declare these variables, we go to our application and import variables, and then end it with a semicolon. Now, you don't have to mark it as CSS, and you don't have to write the underscore. You just need to import the name of the file. Don't need the underscore, don't need the extension. Import variables and save. Now we have access to all these variables. So if we have a file called main.scss, and that's where we're going to do most of our styling. So we can say our paragraph text, and we want our paragraph text to be, and you can see here it's going to recognize deep purple from the variable file, and we'll do color deep purple, save. So we can use our variables in our files, and main can be actually a partial as well. I could just write the underscore. However you want to develop your CSS is up to you. You definitely want to use modular CSS, where you're developing it in independent pieces. That way it makes it easy to change and easy to fix and make adjustments if necessary. But the point of this is just to show you that you can use variables declared here, and then you could use them in your main. Now, you'll want to make sure that you import your main after your variables, because there's some dependencies. As you can see here, if we import main first, then it will not know what deep purple is. But as long as we import the variables first, then in the main file, we'll be able to use the variables and any of the Semantic UI framework components. So this is generally how I set up an application. I'll have a variables, a new file, I'll do mix-ins in one. If you wanted to set up anything else, you could set it up as many files as you want. You'll just need to make sure that once you create the file, if you're going to be using it in your application, you have to import it using the @import command. Now we're set up and we're ready to start developing our application. Let's go back to our terminal and run a generate command so we can generate some content. We'll use Rails G for generate. We could generate a model or a controller. We could generate a resource. If we just type Rails G, it'll show us all of the different options that we can use with Rails Generate. Assets, controller, helper, integration test, a job, mailer. Let's get started with something simple. Let's do a scaffold and see what that gives us. Rails G scaffold. We're going to scaffold a post. Now, scaffold means it's going to set up a model for us. It's going to give us the controller and views as well. What we're going to type in the command line is the name of the model, post, followed by the attributes of that model. So, for example, we have a post. We can add an attribute like title, and we can declare the title is a string. We can add a body to the post. We can let the body be a string or of type text, and then we hit enter, and you can see it generated some files for us. So let's take a look at the files that were generated. Our model, we have a post model now, and you can see this is a MongoDB document. It's a class post, and we have our fields. Text becomes string with MongoDB, which is fine. We have a field title and a field body. One thing that we'd like to add that it does not include by default is going to be the MongoDB timestamps. This will give us the created at and updated at functions. And now we have our post here. If we look at our controllers, we have a post controller with all of this code that's generated for us. And then it also gave us a view. You can see it gives us a folder called posts and then all the corresponding views here. Also, if we look in our config routes file, you can see resources posts. It's put in our route file. So we're all set up with that single command to begin our application. If we open up our terminal again and type Rails S, it will start the server. You can see here, server running on port 3000. So we'll open up a browser, navigate to localhost, port 3000. And it's going to give us our generic yay you're on Rails page because we forgot to set a root post. So let's go ahead and at the top of our routes file type root, and we're going to use posts controller index action. Save that and refresh. Now it should take us to the index action of the post controller while remaining on our root URL. And here we are. You can see our posts, title body, a new post button. Our title here is crowdfund. This is a list of all our posts. That's what the index action does. Let's take a look at that. Post controller. Def index, it's our index action, at post equals post.all. So what the index action is doing is listing all of our posts. We just created our application. We don't have any posts, but we can create a new one. So post new. We click on create post. It takes us to post new here. As you can see, new and new. and that is going to be a post.new. It's going to be creating a new instance of a post. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a title called first post, and then in the body we're going to type, this is post number 1, and click create post. Post was successfully created. Title first post, body. This is post number 1. You can see here in the URL we're at posts and some long crazy number. This is the identifier of this first post. The primary key, the ID field, _ID in MongoDB. It's generated for us automatically. Let's go back. Now we can see a listing of our post. Title and body. There's also 3 more buttons here: show, edit, and delete. So as you can see, this has scaffolded out a little application for us with one single line from the command line. But hold on just a second. This doesn't seem right. Something's wrong. This was way too easy. We didn't even create a database or connect to a database or do any of that. We just ran one scaffolding command through the Rails command line, and now all of a sudden we have this database connected application. It just seems like it's too good to be true. So let's test it out. If we take a new terminal and we go open up an instance of MongoDB, it's going to connect us to test. Let's use a different database. How about crowdfund development? This is the name of the database that was given to us when we configured the Mongoid gem. Switch to DB crowdfund development. Okay, all commands start with DB first, dot, the name of the collection, posts. We could do dot find to return all of them. We can attach pretty to make it look nicer. And it looks like we have one post here with an object ID. First post, this is post number 1, and created and updated at fields. And this object ID looks a little bit familiar. It looks exactly like the object ID in our URL bar. So it looks like you don't need to create a database. You could just create a collection, and now we have a document that's created here, our first post. Because that's what the controller is doing. The controller is communicating with the database. The controller here is doing post.new. The controller here is doing create post new with the post params that we're providing. If it's successful, then render this notice and redirect to the post. So it looks like the scaffolding command gave us a full controller of resourceful actions. We can create, update, read, destroy data, and it's automatically hooked up with our database, in this case MongoDB. Well, that's pretty cool. We just got up and running and everything's connected really fast. So the generic scaffolding is pretty shoddy. I went ahead and added one line from the semantic framework to the table. I added class UI sortable cell table. And as you can see, this cleaned up the table and made it look 10 times nicer. And then to get these colors here, I added a positive, warning, and negative class to the table data within the body. So just by simply adding class UI sortable cell table, and by giving the table data for these actions, the positive, warning, and negative classes, we were able to have a nice clean table here with the different colors showing that this is like a warning for editing. This is like a destructive action. It's destroy, so it's got a warning color here. Also, you can see that I use the icon. The Semantic UI framework has the full port of the Font Awesome icons ported in, so you can do a link to semantic icon trash, and then I concatenate that with the word destroy. This could also be delete if we wanted to change it to delete, and that is the helper method that comes with the semantic gem for the semantic Rails gem. So by using this helper, this link to semantic icon trash helper, this is the helper right here. Just by doing semantic _ icon and then trash, the ERB will interpret this and put the font awesome icon there. It makes it really simple to use the font awesome icons. And now you can see I just changed it to delete. If we wanted to have a new post, as you can see, it goes right in our table here, and this just looked a lot nicer, and it only took one line of code. Really easy to do. So now at this point in our application, there's actually one other thing that we might want to add. Going back to the Semantic UI gem, as you can see here, they have some helpers. One of the helpers is a flash helper, where they offer the semantic flash for the layout. Now by default, as you can see, if we're in our application and we edit a post, for example, and we change this and update it, and you can see we have the flash hash up here. Post was successfully updated. That's built into Rails. Awesome feature that it comes with that. That's really great. But we want something that looks a little bit nicer than that. So what we're going to do is go on our layouts application page. Now remember, this is the setup for every page. So whether we're on the show page or whether we're on the index page, this is the setup for every page. So if we add our semantic flash in here, then that's going to be at the top of every page, because you can see the yield is below it. Semantic flash above that. So now if we do something like edit, you can see here the notice is here. This is where that original flash notice comes from. Rails puts that in automatically. And if we do, this is post number uno, update post. You can see here this was our original flash hash message, and now you can see this is the semantic UI message. It gives us a closable message, and it's in green right here. That's a nice feature to have. It looks a lot better. So that means we don't need the original notice. We can delete that out. That's on our index page, and the same thing goes for our show page. We don't need this notice anymore because we're going to use the semantic notices. You can refresh that and go back. Another thing you might want to consider doing in your application is maybe put your navigation in this file here, because that way your navigation will span across all different pages within your site. So we can look at the options for navigation by going to the Semantic UI website. And you can see all of their options are laid out here. If we wanted to go use a menu, we can search here for the different type of menu that we'd like to have, and then we could put that right in our website. So let's use like a secondary menu like this. We can use that as our primary menu. Just as an example, we'll put that above the flash message. Come back to our website and refresh. Now you can see we have a menu that's going to be persisted on every single page. So whether we're on the show page or we're on the edit page, whatever page we're currently on, our menu is going to still be there. Now it's showing active on home because that's actually hard coded in there. So we'd want to change that so that active is the page that we're actually on. You don't want to hard code that in the HTML. But by putting a menu in our application page, then that's going to be on every single page, as you can see. Now, you also might want to put a footer or some other text or components in this application page. So you can imagine that this would get filled up pretty quickly. One thing you could do, similar to how we did partials for Sass, is we can do partials for the ERB pages. ERB just stands for Embedded Ruby. So if I create a new file, we could call this navigation.html.erb. We can pull out all of our navigation menu, put it in the new file that starts with an underscore, and then in our layout page, we just put render layouts navigation. We do not need to put the underscore or any file extension. So render layouts navigation. For this to work, we would need to have a page in our layouts folder with the title of navigation, which we do, underscore navigation, and this will do the same exact thing. So as long as we save the file and refresh our page, we should see no change. And it doesn't matter what page we're on, if we're on a show page, if we're on an edit page, our menu is going to stay on the top there. So as you can see, it's a really simple way. Now we want to clean this up. We wouldn't want to use a secondary menu likely. We'd want to use something a little bit better looking, but I just wanted to show you how you could put a menu on your site, and that's going to persist across all the pages. Now if you want to change one of the pages in your navigation, you just go to that navigation partial, and you can change one of the pages to contact and save it. That's going to change across your entire site. You don't need to change it on every page as if it was hard-coded on every page. You just change it in one place and then you're good to go. So at this point, we've created our application, we've created a model, we've got some instances of that model, so we've got some posts saved in our database, we've got a navigation, we've set up some styling, we've got a good foundation to continue building our application. One thing that we haven't done yet that we're going to need to do is to use a version control, so that way we can share our code with others. We can get help with our code when something's not working, or we could just back up our code so that way when we make changes in the future, we could always revert back if something breaks or if something's not working. We need a way to revert back to an earlier version. So what we'll do is back up our project and we'll use a version control system. So what we'll do is go to either GitHub or Bitbucket. We'll create a repo. We'll need to give the repo a name. I'm going to create a project for this particular repo, and then the repository name is crowdfund. I don't need it to be a private repository, and I'm using Git. Check the advanced settings, create repository. Now we've created a repository online. What we could do, they give you the instructions if you have an existing project or if you're starting from scratch. What we're going to do is go to our command line within our application. So we are in the root of our application, crowdfund, and we're going to run the command git init. It's going to set us up with our repository. Now we need to add all of our files that we've created so far. So git add, and we're going to use the flag or the option capital A, and then we need to do one more step before we can push them to our repository. We need to commit with a message. We could say something like initial commit. That's going to put it in create mode, and it's going to put all of the files that we created so far, everything, our entire application, everything we need to get to the point we're at right now has just been committed. So all we need to do is add the remote path, which Bitbucket gives us here. So after entering that command, now we have a place to push our repository, and we're going to push it with git push. The -u option is upstream, and origin master is the pushing it to the master branch of our application. That's pretty common that you're going to use a push command that's going to look similar to this. And after pushing that, it's going to connect us and push everything up. So it's going to say writing objects 100%. That means everything has been written correctly. So now on Bitbucket, we have our entire, let's see, where's our source? We have our entire application at this point backed up online. So we can now share our application with other developers if we need help and we have a friend that maybe knows a little bit more about Rails than we do, then we can say, hey, can you check out this application? Here's the link, and they'll go and they can then download it on their computer, and they can play with it, work with it, add things to it. You can do a lot of things with version control. Anytime you're working on a team, or you're working with a project, or even if you're working by yourself on a project, and you're gonna be working on the same project for a long time, it's a great idea to use a version control system. The most popular two are GitHub and Bitbucket. They are different. There's different things that I like about each one. I've been using GitHub more frequently than Bitbucket, but I just started using Bitbucket again. And like I said, there's some good things about Bitbucket that I really like. There's some good things about GitHub that I really like. If you have to pick one, I would say try out both of them, see which one you like better. Most people probably use GitHub, but it's a personal preference. So now we have everything backed up. If we're ever confused as to what our status is, we can do git status, and that will tell us that everything is up to date. So there hasn't been any changes that we need to commit. Now once we start making changes, we'll see that those changes are not added, and we're going to need to make a commitment. So let's take a look at what that might look like. Let's say we make a change to our navigation. We are no longer going to be using this messages link here, so we delete that off and save it. And now a git status is going to tell us we have a modified file located in app views layouts navigation HTML ERB. Whoops. And now this has not been committed. So once you add the file, then Git is going to watch for changes, and once the changes are made, you can then commit those changes, and then you can push those commits to your repository online. So version control is a big part of setting up and working with your application. So this pretty much concludes the first video. We started our application, we got everything set up and configured properly. We know how to create posts, we know how to work with the controller, and how the controller works with the database to save our information. In the next video, we're going to be adding more models to our application, a user model for instance. We're going to be adding new features, logging in and logging out for the user model, and then we're going to be having some associations. Users are going to have posts, and the posts are going to be belonging to the different users, and then there's going to be the ability to comment on posts, and the comments are going to belong to specific users, and we're going to embed comments in the posts, and we're going to be doing some more complicated, not complicated, but just some more complex interactions within our application. So look forward for that video, and hopefully you guys liked this. If you did, share it, give it a thumbs up. Hopefully it's helpful. If you have any questions, feel free to leave a comment.